Good morning. I'm Marti Jewell, and I'm going to share with you a very brief history of lay ecclesial ministry standards. I've been involved with the development of the standards kind of from the beginning. I found it exciting when we began, and I still find this work fascinating. So I hope you'll enjoy this history. We'll start in the 1970s. Pastors looking at their parishes and seeing that the public school children had not gotten any religious ed, they asked women religious to come in and teach catechism to the public school children. Eventually, lay women and men were hired by parishes to work with them, and we saw the beginning of lay ministry. In the 1980s, there was a widespread presence of lay ministers in U.S. parishes. This was a grassroots movement spreading quickly across the country. National associations formed, diocesan ministry formation programs developed, universities began offering ministry degrees to laity, and we were claiming our baptismal call to ministry. But in the process, we discovered the need for professional standards. How were we to do this brand new ministry? How were we to create a brand new profession? Inspiration came from two sources. The first, from universities that were using competency-based education models. And in these, students had to demonstrate not only knowledge, but also their ability to put it into practice. The second came from the Commission on Certification and Accreditation of the United States Catholic Conference. And this group had been certifying chaplaincy programs for the Bishops' Conference. And so they brought their expertise to us to help us understand what we were undertaking. Now, let's go back to the mid-1980s. At this time, diocesan religious educators were developing standards for use, competencies for use in their diocese by their catechists. And then NCCL, at that time, NCDD, collected these competencies from around the country and developed the first set of competencies for religious ed. And those were endorsed in 1996 by the Commission. The second group to be interested were the youth ministers, and they were influenced by their ordained peers in campus ministry, and they developed competences which were actually the first to be endorsed in 1990. And then in 1995, the NOM standards were endorsed. Ministry formators had realized that they needed something to base their ministry formation programs on, and NOM developed competencies for pastoral associates, pastoral ministers, and parish life coordinators. Now, about this time, around 1995, the Association for Graduate Programs in Ministry, lovingly known as OGPIM, called for common competencies. As academics looked at the field, they found, well, by this time, over 1,000 competencies, and they didn't know how to put these into their programs. And so OGPIM charged two of its members to see if there was any shared or common competencies in the lot. There were, and they pulled these out. Then, in the next 5 years, NOM and FCYM and NCCL worked together with these shared or common competencies, and they developed what we now have, the core and specialized standards for ministry. And in 2000, the Common Formation Goals for Ministry was published. Now, by 2000, the bishops are beginning to pay attention. Like I said, this was an exciting time. People all over the country were excited about being able to share their lives, answer their call to ministry, to church work, to be in the parishes. Parishes were coming alive. There was lots going on in the parishes. And so the bishops wanted to take a look at this. And they first published in 1999 the State of the Question. And in this, they first gave the profession a name, lay ecclesial ministry, which we use to still. And they acknowledged the standards, even though they said they would not themselves develop standards for ministry. In 2005, Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord was published. This was based on a good 10-year consultation of both ordained and laity across the country about lay ministry. And it was, as it focused on formation, it relied heavily on the standards for formation. In 2011, the commission was dissolved. It was no longer certifying programs, and their work was not needed. The work with the standards was moved into a USCCB subcommittee of the Committee on Education. Got all these words? Okay. And they continued to work with the standards. That subcommittee was disbanded in 2023. Now, the national organizations were very busy during this period. By 2011, they had created the Alliance for Certification, which was a collaborative effort of NALM, NFCYM, NCCL, and two more, the pastoral musicians and the diocesan liturgical commissions, and they wanted to create a program that would offer national certification to individual lay ministers in the hopes that these certifications would assist the bishops in their task of authorizing lay ministers. This process was never really embraced by either lay or ordained, and so by 2021, the alliance was disbanded. Ownership of the standards, of course, retained by the organizations. Now, also during this period of time, there were multiple revisions of the standards. About every 5 to 7 years, people were looking at them. And the revision in 2011 moved from 5 to 4 pillars. The 4 pillars, which paralleled the program for priestly formation, spiritual, personal, intellectual, and pastoral. They no longer kept the 5th pillar, which was professional. By 2018, in that revision, it was very clear that the standards did not address the growing diversity in our parishes and the need for cultural skills and sensitivities on the part of lay ministers, and those were begun to be added in 2018. You now, 7 years later, are looking at the next iteration. First of all, I want to say, as you think about this, remember it takes a village. Unbelievable numbers of people and organizations spent countless hours to develop and create and then use the standards. We've discovered and absolutely believe in the value and need for standards with competences, which empower and accompany people in their ministry. And we've discovered that national lay organizations have the capacity to collaborate. No small thing. We know it's possible, not easy, but possible, and absolutely necessary as we continue as a community to develop these standards. So a couple of things to remember. First of all, the original standards were written for the parish of 40 years ago to meet the needs of the new lay ministers, the faithful. They weren't developed for institutions. They were grassroots movement and effort. The institutions, organizations did co-opt them over time. That wasn't their original intention. And secondly, it's important to think about the original intention that the standards would empower and equip lay ministers, whether or not they were certified or degreed. So something to think about. So this is your context today, and this is really important for you to look at the church that you're writing this next iteration for. Our parishes are diverse, often sharing a pastor. They're challenged by polarization and pandemic trauma. Fewer people are participating in church, whether because of COVID or because young adults are done or none. Younger ministers have their own work ethic and style of learning, and the synodal church is calling us to be co-responsible and respond to our baptismal call. These and more are your context. So I invite you to be curious, be creative, reimagine and reinvent the standards and competencies needed for church today. Don't just revise, reimagine and reinvent. Thank you very much for becoming part of this community.